What if I told you that one decision, one moment of pure desperation, could rewrite your entire life? Imagine being 63 years old, your savings gone, your health fading, and your own family treating you like a burden, a ghost haunting their perfect lives. That was me, Arthur Jenkins, just a few months ago. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, it was the same condescending smiles, the thinly veiled pity, the whispers about poor Arthur who just couldn't quite make it. My nephews, my nieces, even my own sister Eleanor, would look at me with that familiar mix of contempt and obligation, as if my very existence was an inconvenience. They saw a failure, a man whose best days were long behind him. But what they didn't see, what they could never have imagined, was the secret I carried in my wallet, the tiny slip of paper that was about to turn their world, and mine, completely upside down. My resentment had been simmering for years, a slow burn beneath the surface of forced holiday cheer. It wasn't just the money, although that was a huge part of it. It was the way they'd always dismissed my dreams, mocked my struggles, and celebrated their own successes with an almost cruel glee. Eleanor, with her sprawling house in Scottsdale and her husband's booming real estate business, loved to remind me of her wise investments while I struggled to pay my medical bills. My nephew, Michael, a hotshot lawyer in Dallas, would casually mention his latest European vacation, knowing full well I hadn't left the state of Arizona in a decade. Each barbed comment, each subtle jab, chipped away at my dignity, fueling a quiet rage I never dared to show. I was trapped, financially and emotionally, in a cycle of their judgment. Then came the betrayal. It wasn't a sudden dramatic revelation, but a slow, agonizing realization. I overheard Eleanor on the phone, discussing my situation with Michael. She wasn't talking about helping me. She was talking about selling my small, inherited plot of land, the only thing I had left, to cover my future care. They were planning my future without me, deciding my fate as if I were a senile old man incapable of making my own choices. The land, passed down from my grandfather, held memories, dreams, and the last shred of my independence. To hear them so casually discuss liquidating it, treating me like a charity case, felt like a knife twisting in an old wound. That conversation, those cold, calculating words, solidified something within me. The resentment transformed into an obsession. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was determined. I would prove them wrong, not just for myself, but for the ghost of the man they had tried to bury. The idea, when it first flickered into existence, felt like a desperate gamble, a fool's errand. But the more I thought about it, the more it became my singular focus. I started playing the lottery, not just a casual ticket here and there, but every single week, meticulously studying the numbers, spending the last few dollars I had. My friends, the few I had left, thought I was losing my mind. "Arthur, you're throwing good money after bad," they'd say, shaking their heads. But they didn't understand. This wasn't about winning money. It was about reclaiming my life, about proving to myself and to my family that I wasn't done yet. It was about justice, my own twisted version of it. The tickets became my hope, my secret weapon against the condescension and the betrayal. The night it happened, the night the numbers were drawn, I almost didn't check. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I stared at the television screen, the glowing digits mocking me, until one by one, they matched. It wasn't just a win, it was a jackpot, a life-altering sum that would make Eleanor's wise investments look like pocket change. My first instinct was to scream, to dance, to tell the world. But then a colder, more satisfying thought took hold. This wasn't just my escape, it was my moment of reckoning. This was my chance to finally confront them, to expose their hypocrisy, and to watch their carefully constructed world crumble. The next family gathering was at Eleanor's sprawling Arizona estate, the usual facade of forced smiles and subtle digs. They were all there, my sister, my nephews, their perfect spouses and children. The air was thick with their usual chatter about stock portfolios and private school tuition. I sat quietly, a ghost at the feast, just as they expected. But this time, I held the key to their shock, to their absolute disbelief. As Michael launched into another anecdote about his latest high-stakes legal victory, I felt the corner of my mouth twitch. They had no idea what was coming. They had no clue that the broke uncle they so easily dismissed was about to deliver a revelation that would shatter their illusions and redefine everything they thought they knew about me. The moment I pulled that lottery ticket from my wallet, their carefully curated smiles would vanish, replaced by a look of stunned horror. What happened next wasn't just about money. It was about a lifetime of unspoken resentments, a profound betrayal, and a justice that was long overdue. You will not believe the chaos that erupted, the accusations that flew, and the shocking secrets that were uncovered when I finally revealed my lottery ticket. My name is Arthur Finch, and for 37 years, my life had been a meticulously crafted tapestry of disappointment, woven thread by the very people who should have been my strongest allies, my family. They saw me as a permanent fixture in the landscape of their pity, a living, breathing testament to what happens when you don't apply yourself. Every holiday dinner, every casual gathering at my sister Eleanor's sprawling suburban mansion in Scottsdale, Arizona, became another opportunity for them to subtly, or not so subtly, remind me of my perceived failures. It started innocently enough, a gentle prod about my career choices, or rather, my lack thereof. I'd always had a passion for art, for painting the world as I saw it, but that wasn't a real job in their eyes. My brother Richard, a man whose entire personality seemed to be forged from stock market reports and golf club memberships, never missed a chance to highlight his latest acquisition, his newest vacation home, or the private school tuition for his perfectly coiffed children. Then he'd turn to me, Arthur, with that condescending tilt of his head, and ask, "Still sketching art? Found your big break yet?" His words were always dipped in a honeyed sarcasm that stung far more than any direct insult. Eleanor, with her designer clothes and perfectly manicured nails, was even worse. She'd offer me opportunities that felt more like charity cases. "Arthur, darling, my gardener needs a hand with the hedges. It's good, honest work, and you're so good with your hands." The implication hung heavy in the air. I was only good for manual labor, a low-wage worker, certainly not an artist. She'd even tried to set me up with her friends' less successful acquaintances, women she clearly thought were on my level. Each failed attempt at a blind date was just another notch on the belt of my perceived inadequacy, another piece of evidence for their ongoing family trial. My parents, bless their hearts, were the silent enablers. They'd nod along, clucking their tongues at my situation, never defending me, never challenging Richard or Eleanor. Their pity was a suffocating blanket, heavier than any outright scorn. I lived in a cramped, rented apartment in a less than desirable part of Phoenix, a stark contrast to their opulent lifestyles. My car, a beat-up sedan with more miles than an astronaut, was a constant source of embarrassment whenever I pulled into their pristine driveways. They'd look at it, then at me, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and profound disappointment. The resentment had been simmering for years, a slow burning ember in my gut. I'd tried to ignore it, to focus on my art, to believe that my worth wasn't tied to my bank account. But their constant barrage, their casual dismissals, chipped away at my resolve. I remembered one Thanksgiving, Richard had actually pulled out his phone, showing off pictures of his new yacht, while I, Arthur, sat there, my stomach churning with a mixture of anger and humiliation, trying to make small talk about the mashed potatoes. He'd then made a joke about me needing a bailout for my art supplies, and the whole table had laughed. Even my mother had chuckled. That was the day something inside me snapped. I started to withdraw, to avoid their calls, to make excuses for not attending family functions. But even my absence was a topic of discussion, another sign of my unreliability. They'd call me, not out of genuine concern, but to deliver thinly veiled lectures about family values and showing up. Each interaction was a fresh wound, a reminder of how little they valued me, Arthur, as a person, as an artist, as their brother, their son. They only saw my empty pockets, my struggling existence. The turning point, though, came just last month. It was my niece's birthday party, a lavish affair at a country club that probably cost more than I made in a year. I'd spent weeks painting her a custom portrait, a heartfelt gift I'd poured my soul into. When I presented it, Eleanor took one look, forced a tight smile, and then handed it to a maid, whispering something about finding a place for it in the attic. Richard, ever the opportunist, then loudly announced his gift, a trust fund for her college education. The contrast was brutal, a public declaration of my financial inferiority. That night, driving home through the deserted streets of Phoenix, the weight of their disdain felt crushing. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, a fierce resolve hardening in my chest. I was tired of being the family joke, the broke artist, the perpetual disappointment. Something had to change. I needed a way out, a way to show them, to prove to them, that Arthur Finch was more than just a punchline. I needed a victory, a dramatic, undeniable victory that would silence their mocking laughter forever. Little did I know, a seemingly ordinary trip to a convenience store the very next day would set in motion a chain of events that would unravel their carefully constructed world, and mine, in ways none of us could ever imagine. The resentment had reached its peak. Now the stage was set for a reckoning. That next morning a dull ache throbbed behind my eyes, a souvenir from another sleepless night spent replaying every cutting remark, every condescending glance. The air in my small apartment felt heavy, suffocating me with the accumulated weight of their judgment. I needed to escape, even if just for a few minutes. Grabbing my worn wallet, I headed out, my mind still churning with the sting of Richard's latest jab about my artistic endeavors, and Eleanor's thinly veiled pity. The convenience store on the corner was a familiar refuge, a place where no one knew Arthur Finch, the family disappointment. As I waited in line, my gaze drifted to the brightly colored scratch-off tickets displayed behind the counter. A fleeting thought, a whisper of defiance sparked within me. Why not? What did I have to lose? My life was already a masterclass in losing. I picked out a Mega Millions scratcher, the kind with the biggest advertised jackpot, a ridiculous fantasy purchase that felt strangely liberating. The cashier, a young woman with tired eyes, barely registered my presence as she handed it over. I tucked the ticket into my pocket, the flimsy paper a stark contrast to the heavy weight in my chest. Later that afternoon, back in the quiet solitude of my apartment, I remembered the ticket. With a sigh, I pulled it out, a faint smile playing on my lips. It was a silly gesture, a childish rebellion against the crushing reality of my existence. I found a coin and began to scratch, half-heartedly, not expecting anything more than the usual string of non-winning symbols. The first few numbers revealed nothing. My smile faded. Of course. Why would anything ever be different for Arthur? Then, a symbol appeared. Not just any symbol, but the exact number I needed. My breath hitched. Could it be? My heart began to pound, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. My hands trembled as I scratched faster, a surge of adrenaline coursing through me. Another matching number. Then another, and another. The world around me seemed to blur, the mundane details of my apartment fading into insignificance. All that existed was the gleaming silver under my coin, slowly revealing a future I had only dared to dream of in my most desperate secret moments. The final number appeared, clear and undeniable. I stared at it, uncomprehending, my mind struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. It was real. All the numbers matched. I had won. Not a small prize, not a few $100s, but the jackpot. The Mega Millions jackpot. The sheer impossibility of it stole the air from my lungs. I sank onto my worn sofa, the lottery ticket clutched in my hand like a lifeline, my mind reeling. This wasn't just money. This was power. This was freedom. This was my chance. A cold, hard resolve began to settle in my gut, replacing the shock. This wasn't about lavish spending or escaping to some tropical paradise. This was about something far more primal, far more satisfying. This was about them, my family. Richard, Eleanor, and their carefully constructed world of condescension and pity. They had spent years chipping away at my self-worth, making me feel small and insignificant. Now, Arthur Finch, the perpetual failure, held a winning lottery ticket that would change everything. The resentment, which had simmered for decades, now boiled over into a potent, intoxicating brew of determination. I spent the next few days in a haze, the winning ticket hidden safely away, my mind racing with possibilities. The first step was to claim the prize, to make it undeniably mine. The process was surprisingly straightforward, though the sheer scale of the win made it feel surreal. I chose the lump sum option, a decision that felt both reckless and entirely necessary. Every signature, every form, every conversation with the lottery officials cemented the reality of my new fortune. Arthur, the struggling artist, was now Arthur, the multimillionaire. But the real challenge lay ahead. How would I reveal this to them? How would I make them truly understand the depth of their cruelty, the sting of their words, the weight of their judgment? I knew I couldn't just throw money at them or simply disappear. That wouldn't be enough. That wouldn't provide the catharsis I craved. I needed a plan, a meticulously crafted strategy that would deliver a punch as precise and devastating as their years of subtle mockery. I wanted them to feel what I had felt, to witness the dramatic reversal of our roles. The perfect opportunity presented itself in the form of Eleanor's annual charity gala, a glittering affair she hosted every year to showcase her impeccable taste and social standing. It was the epitome of their world, a place where status was currency and appearances were everything. I had always avoided it, citing a prior engagement or a sudden artistic inspiration. But this year, Arthur would attend. This year, Arthur would make an entrance. And this year, their carefully constructed facade would begin to crumble, piece by agonizing piece. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and exhilarating anticipation. The stage was indeed set, and the curtain was about to rise on my grand performance. The invitation arrived, a thick cream-colored card, embossed with Eleanor's ridiculously ornate family crest. It was for their annual Christmas Eve gala, an event I usually managed to sidestep with a convenient illness or a sudden pressing artistic commitment. This year, however, my resolve was ironclad. I RSVP'd with a flourish, a small, defiant act that felt like the first brushstroke on my canvas of retribution. The thought of facing them, of enduring their thinly veiled barbs and pitying glances, still churned my stomach. But a new, steelier resolve had taken root. This wasn't about avoiding their judgment anymore. It was about delivering my own. For weeks, I meticulously planned my entrance. I knew their game, every subtle microaggression, every condescending remark. They expected Arthur, the perpetually struggling artist, the one who always looked a little too worn, a little too out of place in their gilded cage. I decided to give them Arthur, but a version they wouldn't recognize. I invested in a tailored suit, a dark, elegant charcoal that fit me like a second skin. I got a sharp haircut, trimmed my beard, and even bought a pair of Italian leather shoes, a splurge that would have made my practical parents gasp. Each purchase felt like an armor plate clicking into place, preparing me for battle. The night of the gala arrived, cold and crisp, the desert air biting at my cheeks as I pulled up to Eleanor's mansion. The valet, a young man who looked barely old enough to drive, stared at my modest sedan with a polite but unmistakable air of confusion. I handed him the keys, a ghost of a smile playing on my lips. The house glowed, a beacon of ostentatious wealth, every window ablaze with the warm, inviting light of 1,000 strategically placed bulbs. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses spilled out into the night, a symphony of their carefully curated happiness. Taking a deep breath, I adjusted my tie and walked towards the double oak doors, my heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Stepping inside was like entering a different world, a bubble of polished marble and sparkling crystal. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, rich food, and the faint underlying aroma of their self-satisfaction. My eyes swept over the familiar faces, a sea of perfectly coiffed hair and designer outfits. Richard was there, holding court by the fireplace, his booming laugh echoing through the grand hall. Eleanor, a vision in emerald green, was flitting between guests, her smile as dazzling and artificial as the diamond necklace adorning her throat. My parents were perched on a plush velvet settee, looking every inch the proud patriarch and matriarch, oblivious to the storm brewing within their own sun. No one noticed me at first. I was just another face in the crowd, a momentary blip in their carefully orchestrated evening. I moved through the room, a silent observer, allowing the familiar dynamics to wash over me. The small talk, the one-upmanship, the casual dismissal of anyone who didn't fit into their narrow definition of success. It was all so predictable, so utterly them. A sense of detached calm settled over me, replacing the earlier anxiety. This was my stage, and I was finally ready to perform. Then, Eleanor spotted me. Her perfectly arched eyebrows shot up in surprise, a flicker of something akin to confusion crossing her face. "Arthur, is that really you?" she exclaimed, her voice carrying across the room, drawing a few curious glances. Her tone held a hint of disbelief, as if a ghost had just walked into her meticulously planned party. I offered her a small, enigmatic smile. "Hello, Eleanor. Merry Christmas." Her eyes, usually so quick to dissect and dismiss, now lingered, searching for the familiar signs of my perceived failure, but finding only a polished, unreadable surface. Richard, hearing her exclamation, turned from his conversation, his usual smirk faltering as he took me in. His gaze was sharper, more scrutinizing than Eleanor's, as if trying to uncover the trick. "Art? Well, look at you. All dressed up. What's the occasion? Finally got that art gallery gig you always dreamed of?" His words were laced with his usual condescension, but there was a new, almost imperceptible edge of uncertainty in his voice. He was trying to reassert dominance, to put me back in my familiar box, but his usual tools felt duller, less effective. I simply met his gaze, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across my face. "Something like that, Richard. You could say I've had a rather fortunate change of circumstances." The words hung in the air, a subtle challenge, a disruption to the carefully constructed narrative of my life they had all so comfortably embraced. My parents, drawn by the commotion, now looked at me with a mixture of bewilderment and a dawning, uncomfortable curiosity. The emotional arc of resentment had simmered for decades, but now, a subtle shift was occurring. The stage was set for the next act, and the first notes of their discomfort were a sweet melody to my ears. My carefully constructed facade was holding, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of genuine power. The game had begun, and I held the winning hand. The carefully constructed facade of my indifference, a masterpiece I had honed over decades, began to crack just slightly around the edges. I watched, a silent observer at my own family's dinner table, as the familiar patterns of their condescension played out. Eleanor, ever the gracious hostess, but with an underlying current of judgment, offered me a second helping of her artisanal pasta salad. "Arthur, darling, you look a little thin. Are you eating properly?" It wasn't a question of concern. It was an accusation, a subtle jab at my perceived inability to care for myself, a thinly veiled reminder of my supposed destitution. Richard, seated across from me, his expensive watch glinting under the dining room lights, chimed in with his usual bluster. "Eleanor's right, Art. You need to put some meat on those bones. You know, a good steak once in a while wouldn't kill you. Or perhaps a stable income to afford one." He punctuated his remark with a booming laugh, a sound that always grated on my nerves, echoing the hollowness of his own self-importance. My parents, bless their hearts, merely shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their silence a more painful indictment than any of Richard's barbs. They had long since given up on me, their quiet disappointment a constant hum beneath the surface of our strained interactions. A flicker of something. Was it pity? Or perhaps a fleeting sense of guilt crossed my mother's face before she quickly averted her gaze. That was their way, never direct confrontation, always the subtle, insidious erosion of my self-worth. I simply smiled, a tight, almost imperceptible curve of my lips, and accepted the pasta salad. Inside, a storm was brewing, a tempest of long-suppressed emotions finally finding its direction. Their words, once so potent in their ability to wound, now felt like mere background noise, the static before a grand symphony. Later, as the evening wore on and the wine flowed, Richard, emboldened by the alcohol and his usual sense of superiority, decided to escalate his performance. He launched into a lengthy monologue about his latest investment triumph, a property deal that had apparently netted him a fortune. "You know, Arthur," he slurred slightly, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of pride and malice, "it's all about taking risks, but calculated risks. Not just, well, you know, hoping for a miracle." He gestured vaguely in my direction, implying my artistic pursuits were nothing more than a childish fantasy. Eleanor, ever the enabler, nodded sagely. "It's true, Arthur. Life isn't a fairy tale. You have to work hard, make smart choices. You can't just expect things to fall into your lap." Her words, dripping with false concern, felt like a fresh wound, reopening old scars. This was the moment I realized, the precise, agonizing moment I had been waiting for. The resentment, a slow burn for so long, now flared into a blazing inferno. They had built their towers of success on the rubble of my dreams, and it was time for those towers to crumble. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, letting the silence hang in the air, a pregnant pause before the inevitable explosion. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect, about dignity, about reclaiming a narrative they had stolen from me. The game, as I had known, had indeed begun, but they were still blissfully unaware of the rules or the stakes. Their smug expressions, their self-satisfied smirks, were about to be wiped clean. Then, with a casualness that belied the earthquake rumbling within me, I reached into my jacket pocket. My fingers brushed against the smooth, crisp paper, the winning lottery ticket. It felt like a weapon, a silent, unassuming instrument of their impending downfall. Every slight, every condescending remark, every dismissive wave of their hand flashed through my mind, fueling the cold fire in my gut. I looked at each of them, meeting their eyes with a steady, unwavering gaze. There was no longer any fear, no shame, only a profound, almost terrifying clarity. "You know," I began, my voice surprisingly calm, cutting through the chatter like a sharp blade, "you're all absolutely right. Life isn't a fairy tale. And sometimes, miracles don't just fall into your lap." I paused, letting the words hang, watching as a flicker of annoyance, then confusion, crossed their faces. They expected me to capitulate, to agree with their assessment of my perpetual failure. They expected the usual Arthur, the quiet, defeated artist, but that Arthur was gone, replaced by someone they wouldn't recognize. "Sometimes," I continued, my voice gaining a subtle edge, "you have to create your own miracles." With a slow, deliberate motion, I pulled out the lottery ticket. It wasn't a dramatic flourish, but a quiet unveiling, a soft unfolding of their impending doom. The small, unassuming slip of paper, with its row of numbers, was about to become the epicenter of their carefully constructed world. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the comfortable hum of family chatter dying out, replaced by a sudden, stunned silence. Their eyes, initially dismissive, widened almost imperceptibly as they fixated on the ticket in my hand. The game was no longer just beginning, it was about to reach its devastating climax. My parents, bless their hearts, were too entrenched in their own carefully constructed denial to actively participate in the mockery. But their silence, their inability to defend me, spoke volumes. It was a silence that echoed Richard's sneers and Eleanor's patronizing offers. That day, however, as the numbers on my lottery ticket began to align with the winning digits, that silence shattered. The first sound was a gasp, sharp and involuntary, from Eleanor. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth, her eyes, usually so calculating, now wide with a dawning horror. Richard, ever the pragmatist, leaned forward, squinting at the ticket in my hand, then at the screen, as if his superior intellect could somehow rearrange the winning numbers to spare him this indignity. My mother's teacup clattered against its saucer, a small, fragile sound in the sudden, suffocating quiet. My father simply stared, his jaw slack, a man witnessing an impossible apparition. I let the silence hang, thick and heavy, for a full minute, savoring each agonizing second. Their faces, usually so composed, so sure of their place in the world, were a canvas of disbelief, then confusion, and finally, a creeping, sickening dread. They had seen me as a failure, a cautionary tale, a permanent fixture in the landscape of their pity. Now, that landscape was crumbling beneath their feet. It seems, I began, my voice calm, almost unnervingly so, that my big break has finally arrived. The words, once Richard's weapon, now became mine, delivered with a precision that cut far deeper than any direct insult. I watched as the color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly pale. Eleanor, ever the first to recover, albeit poorly, forced a brittle smile. "Arthur, darling, what is this? Some kind of joke?" "You know, you really shouldn't play with our emotions like this." Her voice trembled, betraying the feigned nonchalance. I simply held up the ticket, turning it slightly so the glaring numbers caught the light. "No joke, Eleanor. Every single number. The jackpot." A low murmur rippled through the room. My mother, tears welling in her eyes, reached out a hand, as if to touch the ticket, to confirm its reality. My father, still speechless, merely nodded slowly, a dazed, bewildered expression on his face. Then came the inevitable shift, the sickening pivot I had anticipated for years. Richard cleared his throat, a forced, uncomfortable sound. "Well, Arthur, this is unexpected, truly remarkable. I always said you had a knack for finding unique opportunities." His attempt at revisionist history was so transparent it was almost comical. Eleanor, not to be outdone, chimed in, her voice now dripping with an artificial sweetness that made my teeth ache. "Oh, Arthur, I knew it. I always knew you had this incredible talent, this hidden genius. Remember all those times I told you to just keep pushing, to never give up on your dreams?" Her words were a grotesque distortion of every dismissive comment she had ever made. The irony was a bitter taste on my tongue. I met their gazes, one by one, allowing my own eyes to hold a silent, unwavering judgment. The years of patronizing smiles, the subtle digs, the outright condescension, it all coalesced into this single, potent moment. They were scrambling, desperate to rewrite the narrative, to erase their years of disdain and replace it with fabricated support. But the past, unlike their memories, was not so easily altered. Funny, I mused, my voice still dangerously calm. I seemed to recall a slightly different version of events. I recall being told that painting wasn't a real job. I recall offers of gardening work, Eleanor. And Richard, I distinctly remember your constant inquiries about whether I'd found my big break yet, always delivered with that particular brand of thinly veiled contempt. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. Their faces flushed, a mixture of shame and indignation warring for dominance. They had been exposed, their hypocrisy laid bare for all to see. The comfortable facade of their superiority had crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath. My mother, bless her heart, finally found her voice, a small pleading whisper. "Arthur, darling, we only ever wanted what was best for you." I turned to her, my gaze softening slightly, but the resolve in my eyes remained. "Did you, Mother?" Or did you want what was convenient? What fit neatly into your carefully constructed image of a successful family? The question hung in the air, unanswered, because there was no answer they could give that would absolve them. The years of slights, the casual cruelty, the relentless undermining of my self-worth, it all had led to this. This wasn't just about money. It was about validation, about finally claiming my own worth in a world that had always tried to diminish it. Richard, ever the businessman, cleared his throat again, a nervous habit. Arthur, look, let's not dwell on the past. This is incredible news. We're family. This changes everything for all of us. His eyes, however, betrayed his true thoughts. They held a desperate, calculating glint, already imagining how my newfound wealth could benefit him. Eleanor, quick to follow his lead, stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch my arm. Yes, Arthur, think of the possibilities. We can finally do that family trip to Europe we always talked about. Or maybe invest in that gallery space you always dreamed of. We can help you manage it all, darling. We're so good with investments. Her touch felt slimy. Her words a thinly veiled attempt to stake her claim. I recoiled slightly from her touch, the sudden intimacy feeling like a violation. You're good with investments, Eleanor? Is that why you offered me charity cases disguised as opportunities? Is that why you tried to set me up with women you considered on my level, because my level was so beneath yours? Her face crumpled, the carefully constructed mask of sweetness falling away to reveal a raw, wounded pride. She stamped back, her eyes flashing with a familiar indignation. This was the Eleanor I knew, the one who couldn't stand to be challenged, much less exposed. My gaze swept over them all, lingering on each face, each expression a testament to the seismic shift that had just occurred. They had spent years building a narrative of my failure, and now, with a single lottery ticket, that narrative had been irrevocably shattered. The game was indeed over, and the climax, though devastating for them, was a sweet, intoxicating victory for me. The resolution, however, was still unfolding. The silence that followed my pronouncement was thick, suffocating. A blanket woven from their shattered expectations and my long-held resentment. Eleanor, usually so poised, looked as if someone had just told her the sky was falling. Her perfectly sculpted hair seemed to droop, her carefully applied makeup unable to conceal the shock that contorted her features. Richard, whose face normally exuded an almost smug confidence, was pale, his jaw slack. He kept opening and closing his mouth, like a fish out of water, struggling to find words that simply weren't there. Even my parents, who had always been the quiet enablers of my siblings' cruelty, looked utterly devastated. Their faces, usually etched with a kind of gentle disappointment regarding me, now bore the unmistakable signs of acute personal loss. I let the moment linger, savoring the bitter taste of their disbelief. This wasn't about the money, not entirely. It was about the validation, the shattering of the narrative they had so meticulously constructed around my life. For years they had seen me as a permanent fixture in the landscape of their pity, a living, breathing testament to what happens when you don't apply yourself. Now, that landscape had shifted beneath their very feet. The familiar contours of their superiority had crumbled. Arthur, my mother finally whispered, her voice barely audible. What are you saying? I met her gaze, no longer filled with the quiet resignation that had defined my life for so long, but with a newfound steel. I'm saying, I began, my voice steady, that the days of me being your resident charity case are over. The days of me being the butt of your jokes, the subject of your pity, the one you trot out at family gatherings to make yourselves feel better, those days are done. Richard, finding his voice, albeit a shaky one, blustered. This is some kind of sick joke, Arthur. You're not actually suggesting you won the lottery. You never even played the lottery. A small, knowing smile touched my lips. Oh, but I did, Richard, and I won big. Bigger than you can imagine. I pulled out my phone, navigating to the lottery website, and displayed the winning numbers, cross-referenced with the exact draw date. The glowing screen cast an almost ethereal light on their horrified faces. There was no denying it. The proof was undeniable, stark, and utterly devastating to them. Eleanor, ever the pragmatist, though now a shaken one, stammered, But what does this mean, Arthur?" "We're still family." The sudden shift in her tone was almost comical, a desperate attempt to cling to the remnants of a relationship she had spent decades eroding. "Family?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Is that what we are, Eleanor? Was it family when you offered me gardener jobs? Was it family when you tried to set me up with women you considered beneath you? Was it family when Richard mocked my art, when he paraded his wealth in front of me like a twisted trophy?" My voice rose, each word a hammer blow against their carefully constructed facades. "No, Eleanor, that wasn't family, that was an audience. And I was your perennial act." My parents looked away, unable to meet my gaze, their silence a tacit admission of their complicity. The resolution, which had been slowly unfolding in my mind, now crystallized into a clear, decisive path. "So, what happens now, Arthur?" Richard asked, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. His usual arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked fear. The fear of losing control, of losing access, of losing the one person they could always count on to be less successful than them. I took a deep breath, the weight of years of silent suffering lifting from my shoulders. "What happens now," I stated, my voice ringing with a new authority, "is that I live my life on my own terms. No more holiday dinners where I'm the topic of discussion. No more opportunities that are thinly veiled insults. No more condescending advice." I looked at each of them, allowing my gaze to linger, to impress upon them the finality of my decision. "I'm not going to cut you out entirely. You are, after all, my blood. But the dynamic changes. Drastically. You want to see me? You want to be a part of my life? Then you treat me with respect. You acknowledge my worth, not just my bank account. And you understand that the old Arthur, the one you could walk all over, is gone." Eleanor opened her mouth to protest, but I raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "And no," I continued, anticipating her next move, "there won't be any loans, no investments in your latest ventures. My money is mine, to be used for my art, for my dreams, for the life I've always deserved, not to prop up your failing businesses or fund your lavish lifestyles." The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the dawning realization of their monumental miscalculation. They had banked on my perpetual struggle, on my never-ending need for their approval. They had built their own sense of superiority on my perceived failures. Now, their foundation had been obliterated. The sweet, intoxicating victory I had felt at the climax of my revelation now settled into a profound sense of bittersweet closure. The price of this freedom was the undeniable rupture of what little family bond remained. Yet, for the first time in my life, Arthur felt truly, unequivocally free. The game was over, and I, Arthur Finch, had finally won. The silence that followed my words was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. My sister, Brenda, her face a mask of disbelief, slowly lowered the half-eaten shrimp from her fork. My brother, Mark, who usually had a quick retort for everything, just stared, his mouth slightly agape. My mother, the architect of so much of my pain, actually clutched her chest, her eyes wide with something akin to fear. It wasn't the fear of losing money, it was the dawning realization of what she had truly lost. You won the lottery?" Brenda finally stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The contempt that usually laced her tone was gone, replaced by a desperate, almost pleading note. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across my face. "Not just one, Brenda. I hit the Powerball. The big one. Enough to buy this whole restaurant, the chef, and probably the entire block if I wanted to." I watched their faces, each flicker of emotion a tiny victory for me. Their shock was delicious. A gourmet meal after years of stale breadcrumbs. Mark, ever the pragmatist, cleared his throat. "Arthur, you can't be serious. Why didn't you tell us? His eyes darted around, calculating, assessing. He wasn't seeing his brother anymore. He was seeing a walking, talking jackpot. Tell you? I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. When was the last time you truly cared about anything I had to say, Mark? When I was struggling, you offered platitudes and thinly veiled insults. When I needed help, Mother reminded me of my poor life choices. Brenda just found new ways to highlight her own perceived superiority. The words tumbled out, years of suppressed resentment finally finding their voice. This wasn't just about money. It was about every slight, every dismissal, every moment they made me feel small. My mother, her voice trembling, tried to interject. Arthur, darling, you know we always wanted the best for you. I cut her off, my voice sharp, unforgiving. Did you, Mother? Or did you just want a convenient punching bag? Someone to make your own lives feel more significant? You wanted me to stay exactly where I was, perpetually beneath you, so you could always look down. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the weight of decades of unspoken truths. This wasn't a family dinner, it was a reckoning. Then came the inevitable. Brenda, ever the opportunist, began. Arthur, you know my business is doing quite well, but with a little capital, a strategic investment. Mark chimed in. And my new venture, it's a sure thing. Just needs a kickstart. My mother, tears welling in her eyes, played her ultimate card. Your poor father, God rest his soul, always wanted us to stick together, Arthur, to help each other. I held up a hand, stopping their desperate pleas. No, no more. For years you saw me as nothing, a failure. A joke. And now, suddenly, you see potential? You see family? This isn't about helping each other. This is about what you can take from me. My voice was calm, but the steel beneath it was undeniable. I pulled out a small, ornate box from my inner jacket pocket. Inside, nestled on a velvet cushion, was a single, gleaming key. This, I announced, holding it up for them to see, is the key to a small, comfortable home. Not a mansion, not a palace. Just a modest place, far away from here, where I can finally live in peace. I looked at each of them, letting my gaze linger. You mocked my dreams. You belittled my efforts, and you celebrated my perceived failures. But I learned something important from all of you. I learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in self-worth. And I learned that some ties are better severed. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a deliberate scrape. Enjoy your dinner. It's on me, of course. Consider it a final gesture of generosity. I turned and walked away, not looking back. The silence I left behind was no longer heavy with disbelief, but with the hollow echo of their own self-inflicted isolation. The air outside felt clean, crisp, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly free. The bitterness was still there, a faint aftertaste, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of peace. I had won more than the lottery. I had won my life back.